friends, family, lovers, and haters. My name is Caeser Pink. Let your mama down. Let your mama down. Let your mama down. Baby, please. Today we're going to do something a little different. Instead of music, we're going to talk about social politics, I guess. The other day I was listening to an interview off YouTube while I was on the way to pick up my daughter at school. It was called How Women Ruined the Workplace. And I listen to a lot of different things, so I know what people are talking about and thinking, even if it's things that I suspect I'm going to disagree with. But as I listened to this, the host was interviewing a woman, I think her name was Helen Andrews, who wrote a book about basically how women were ruining the workplace. And as I listened to this, I became more and more agitated, let's say, and so I've decided to make a response to that. By the way, this channel is all the proceeds are donated to the Arete Living Arts Foundation. Arete is a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to create art and promote artists whose work inspires spiritual, political, or personal awakening. If you would like to support us, you could join our Patreon page or make a one-time donation. All donations are tax deductible. Anyways, let's listen to a minute of this interview.
Welcome to the Unspeakeasy Podcast, the podcast formerly known as The Unspeakable. I am your host, Megan Daum. Last week, an article was published in Compact magazine that got a lot of attention. It was called The Great Feminization, and it was written by Helen Andrews, who argued that the phenomenon we often call wokeness is an extension of feminine social norms into institutions that were historically male-dominated. In other words, as women become more represented and even overrepresented in the workplace and elsewhere, the agreeableness and be kind ethos that often comes along with them becomes the default mode. Helen thinks that amounts to a kind of socially engineered dysfunction that prioritizes emotional approaches over realistic, fact-based approaches and hinders productivity and slows innovation.
Now, this is interesting to begin with. Why would cooperation be seen as a dysfunction? I think at the root of this is the idea that physical power and bullying are the main symbol of strength in the world. Right-wingers often say that a dog-eat-dog world is survival of the fittest, that it's the natural state of human beings and all of nature. Now, there's a real flaw in that thinking. Actually, all the evidence suggests that what makes humans and even other species survive are their ability to work together for the common good. Here's a couple examples of that. Check it out.
And also, if it's just about brain size, I keep saying this, if it was just about brain size, elephants and whales would be on this podcast right now and not us. Like, it's not just brain size. So one of the things we argue, actually, is that friendliness, cooperation, is what gave us an edge as a species. And that shocks people because they look at us and they go, the friendly species, really? And I'm like, yes. Actually, there is so much evidence to show that we are a highly cooperative species in a way that no other species has ever been. And that gave us this edge.
Humans control the world because we cooperate better than any other animal. And the basis for all human cooperation is ultimately fiction. These fictional stories that hold together political and religious and economic systems.
Give us the broad strokes. What is the great feminization?
Well, it started with the puzzle that faced a lot of us in the summer of 2020 of what is going on? Where did the Great Awakening come from? And I think that's a question that's going to be studied by historians centuries hence. The same way that we look back at the Salem witch trials and try and figure out what caused that eruption of mass insanity, people are going to be looking at the summer of Floyd and trying to figure out why did everybody go so crazy all at one time?
It's interesting. She is incapable of hiding her bias. She compares wokeness to the Salem witch trials. She calls it a mass insanity. Now, to begin with, this idea that wokeness only came about in 2020 is completely uninformed. In American culture, it's a term that goes back to the 1920s. It's kind of gone in and out of usage throughout the years. Now, 2020 may be the time when college students started using it, or it may be the time that right-wing conservatives started using it as a term, as a pejorative term to make fun of liberals. Now, I think what they call wokeness is sort of the basis of almost all religion. Rather than wokeness, I would call it self-awareness or even human decency. But Christ's teachings in Christianity are all about being aware of those around us rather than thinking only of ourselves, about caring about our neighbor, loving our neighbor. And in Eastern religions, being awake has a slightly deeper meaning. It means waking up from the dream of life, questioning human behavior and the values that guide our behavior. As with Christianity, in Eastern religions, it is all about, if not dissolution of the ego, about controlling the human ego. And really, wokeness is the basis of what makes us human, our ability to overcome our animal instincts and think of a greater good. Maybe starting just with the family unit or with the tribe, or a lot of people, it stops with their nation, the good of the nation, America first. I would say more enlightened people think of it in terms of all humanity, or all living beings, or everything and the earth itself. Strangely, human beings create organizations that actually divide us. Even religions, who seem to carry a message of bringing us together, turn out to be things that we identify with and become a source of us and now mentality. As I mentioned, the same with nations. Now, both of these things are fairly recent inventions by human beings, particularly nations. Really, the concept of nations with a border is only a few hundred years old. And religions, it's really hard to tell how far they go back. It's very complex and was probably not seen as a large unified force that we think of it now. You could have variations in religion from village to village. Often the religious figure was a symbol of the town or city you lived in. But we seem to be always looking for a tribalism that we pretend is vital to our humanity, and then fight for it and against any other. On a lesser stage, the same is true about football teams. Usually it's just good fun, but wasn't too long ago I went to my college town, and somebody was beaten up in a coffee shop because they rooted for the wrong team. Now, another thing that's sort of like this are musical culture, or cultures based on a musical style, like punks, metalheads, there are all sorts of them, as you know.
Wokeness reflects feminine patterns of group behavior, the way women tend to interact with each other, using exclusion and ostracism as a tool of social control. So basically, any aspect of wokeness you can identify or pick out, you can find reflected in differences between men and women. So don't break your brain trying to figure out why did wokeness occur when it's really very simple. It's just wherever there are enough women or a high enough share of women within an institution, you will get wokeness. It is as simple as that. And that seemed really elegant to me and seemed to reflect the facts as far as I can see them.
Now she's building fallacies on fallacies. First, the assumption that wokeness equals insanity. Now the idea that wokeness is all based on feminine behavior. And I love the fact that she adds, don't even try to think about it, implying I have the answer, believe me blindly, don't question. But, this whole idea is based on a certain prism where all women behave one way and all men behave another way. It's based on outdated architectural ideas, not archetypal ideas. I know women who behave at both ends of that spectrum, men who behave on both ends of that spectrum that they lay out, and everywhere in between. It's they start out with two fundamentally flawed principles, and ask us to believe based on those flawed assumptions.
So that's what he did. He left private practice behind and joined this disability rights NGO as their legal director. And he loved that work. It was so beautiful seeing him find purpose at the end of his career towards what ended up being the end of his life. But once when I asked him, how's work going? How's the new job? He said, it's the funniest thing, Helen. At my old job, everybody just did their work and they left you alone and there wasn't a lot of management. And, I love all my new coworkers. They're wonderful and the work is so full of meaning, but I do spend an awful lot of my time managing everybody's feelings now. Like whenever we make a decision at work, I need to make sure that everybody feels like they participated in the decision making. And that never used to come up at my old office. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's nonprofit work is like that. And I said, hang on a second, Dad. I got one question for you. What was the gender balance at your old office and what's the gender balance at the new one? And it really was, all male at the old place and predominantly female at the new place. So that was his personal experience. But it was surprising to me that it wasn't instantly obvious to him why he had to spend so much time managing people's feelings at the new job, that it was obviously because they were ladies. So I think for a lot of us, we kind of tend to have blinders on and not see that gender dynamics are at the bottom of a lot of these differences between workplaces.
Now, the silliness of this is that she, in multiple times in this interview, makes the argument that if men are left alone in a group, everything goes smoothly, they work together, no problem. Of course, we all know that is completely ridiculous. One thing interesting about this, I have noticed, and I talk to and debate a lot of people from all sides, all spectrums of politics, and I've found that a lot of conservatives are very afraid to be offensive by wokeness standards. For instance, if you mention race in any way, even if it is discussing racism, they think that discussion is racist. it's a very peculiar thing, and I find that people who are more open-minded and more liberal are much more free to talk about race, racism, cultural differences, and everybody's, laid back and cool about it. Unless you're being overtly racist, or stupidly racist, people don't get hung up about talking about race. Now, another interesting thing with this is within nature, within a large majority of animals, it is often believed that males battle for the choice of females. But scientists have discovered that this usually isn't the case. Males actually battle for status within a hierarchy, or they battle for land, who has the best territory. And access to the best females are a side effect of this battle for status and territory. Now, there may be another issue behind this dynamic. I was talking to a friend and saying that unless you're looking for a mate, there's really no reason that we need to know another person's gender. Although I think most of us, the minute we meet a person, that's the first thing we take note of. Now, my friend said that he noticed that within himself, and after some reflection he realized that he treats women slightly differently than he does males. And I wonder if that might be the source of what's going on with the writer's father, that in his head he feels he has to behave in a different way when women are around, especially if there are a lot of women around. But this, if he has that need, that's really his problem. It's not the women's problem. You don't get to tell women that your right to exist is a problem because it makes you uncomfortable. And we know men often project their own issues onto women. If those damn women weren't around, everything would be fine.
What are the types of workplaces that have gone full female, or at least, significantly female over the last 50 years or so?
A lot of different professions are at different stages of feminization.
Now, it's interesting she uses the term feminization to mean that there are a lot of women in the workplace. But I think the term feminization really refers to a set of behavior styles. And when they apply it to male and female, it's almost like a cartoon or a caricature of what women are. And men, the masculine man might look like this, or this, or this. Whereas the feminine woman is this, or this, or this. But those stereotypes are not only completely out of date for our modern era, I think they were always out of date. They were always a mythology. And, there are some men and some women who really try to mimic those stereotypes. In men's case, I think that's always a sign of weakness, that they're so afraid or so insecure in their masculinity that they always have to hype it up. They always have to portray this silly idea of what a man is.
When I approach discussion in that spirit with women, it is not always taken in the, not always received in the spirit in which it was offered. Women tend to interpret direct conflict as an affront, or tend to respond not in a spirit of, I'm gonna, you throw a punch and then I throw one and we'll see where we are at the end of the day.
Now, this idea that men are able to have discussion and debate and women aren't is another thing that's just silly. I don't know how life experience could not make everyone see how wrong that argument is. Now, there are scientists who claim that women have better communication skills than men. I wonder if that might also be based on some stereotypes that aren't realistic. Now, I have male friends who are very sensitive to anyone disagreeing with them or anybody criticizing them in the slightest. And they get very emotional about it. I've had lifelong friends who I criticize ever so slightly in a debate who have ended the friendship and hate me from then on. So males can be very sensitive about debate and discussion. Now, the irony about this is that life experience has shown me that the most sensitive demographic are white conservative males. Donald Trump would be a perfect example of it. But they are always whining about how hard they have it, how only white males face racism. Now, this is especially true if they perceive a debate or criticism as an attack on the fundamental idea of white male supremacy. As a joke, I always use their language and tell them to man up and get over it. Now, another interesting thing is that she uses the analogy of a fist fight as the honorable way that men debate. Now, the funny thing about this is that a fist fight is the ultimate admittance that you've lost the fight, that you've lost the verbal debate. So you turn to physical violence, which proves nothing. But again, I think it speaks to the author's fundamental outlook on gender rules, gender behavior.
Do you think that there's an evolutionary component here? Because some might suggest, well, women avoiding conflict, being agreeable, all of these things is a result of, self-preservation. It's not in a woman's interest to get into an argument that might lead to a fist fight.
Now, this goes back to the same nonsense. She's saying that women are afraid to debate because it might lead to a fist fight. I see no sign that women are afraid to debate. And why would a debate lead to a fist fight? Again, it's this view of male and females that's completely primitive and archaic and doesn't resonate with the world I see all around me.
Another funny personal anecdote. When I got right out of college, I taught preschool for a while just to make ends meet while I was writing at night. And for the first few months that I did that, the class where I was a teacher's assistant happened, by the, factors of randomness, happened to be all male. So these were all male preschoolers, just a group of boys.
Wow.
And then a few months in, we got one female student who happened to be quite girly. She wore princessy skirts and everything. And I was astonished to observe the differences in behavior in these kids, in these boys, just from the introduction of a female into that social group. Now, these are 4-year-olds. They're not trying to hook up with anybody, but there is just something about the introduction of a female that makes the men stupider. The boys had previously been quite cohesive, good behavior, got along well with each other. They were brothers. And then as soon as a woman was introduced into the picture, they started becoming competitive. They started fighting with each other more, showing off for the girl to try and present themselves as the king of the mountain, to be the top dog in the eyes of this girl. And I thought I could understand those dynamics if I was dealing with teenagers, but these are 4-year-olds. Where is this coming from? And it really was, I really did learn a lot. Wow, this must be quite deep-seated human behavior, because I don't think they've been socialized into wanting to show off for girls yet.
No,
this
they're
must
not
be
listening
coming from
to
someplace really deep.
bro podcasts yet at age
They
4.
were, no,
but
not listening to.
Now, I'm really surprised by this story. Over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time with children, and I've never seen that type of dynamic among young boys. Now, perhaps she did see that, but overall, her perspective is so biased that I am skeptical. But if she's accurate, it's further proof of my point that male problems are being blamed on females. Everything's fine till this female came into the group. It's obviously the female's fault. It's stupidity.
It's the root of the problem, because you can't, if you're too high in agreeableness, and then you can't tolerate differences of opinion or conflict. And then if you can't do that, then you tend to ostracize people who are occasions for conflict. If there's somebody who has a little bit too many rough edges, you can't deal with that, so you have to exclude them from the group. So yeah, but I've been around on this planet for almost 40 years now, and I've come to understand that agreeableness is not a quality that I possess, but it's not a bad thing. I'm glad that there are people out there who are very high in agreeableness, and they have a role to play, and they're wonderful people, and I'm not better than they are because I'm low agreeableness. For a long time, I thought that I was, and eventually I realized that, nope, it's just, we're just different. Everybody's got a different role to play in this wonderful world. But the place where the rubber hits the road for me is agreeableness good or bad for your profession or for your institution, right? Like, I'm very happy for women to be out there having their high agreeableness, but don't do it in the academy. Don't be a professor and try and do your job from a position agreeableness, right? So the differences in personality are fine, but there are different combinations that are better or worse for specific purposes. And I think that one thing we lost sight of during wokeness was the purpose that these institutions serve.
Now, some traditional ideas about gender behavior is that women are more likely to rule through a community-based system. A community-based system is based on discussion and debate. So, but, I am for discussion and debate completely. But there are some people who always have conflict, are always pushing against everything. And usually this is an ego-based problem. But when you have that, when you have unlimited debate without a system to bring it to an end, you can't get anything done. You can't move forward. When I talk to people and they keep telling me stories about conflicts they've been in, whether it's in the workplace, among their friends, with their family, my radar goes up and I watch out for them because I suspect that it's their own issue that causes them to have problems with everyone in their life.
Like, you see this as a kind of, and I know you wrote a whole book about the baby boomers, which is another topic I love, but you see this as a sort of second wave feminist, out of the baby boom sexual revolution sort of gestalt phenomenon. Like there's sort of like a whole bunch of moving pieces, and probably around late 60s, early 70s, the tenor of the culture started to change, and there was all these, kind of blank slate ideas, and that, boys and girls were the same, and these were all of these sex differences were socially constructed and imposed upon us, and it was our duty as enlightened, modern people to override that. And
I don't know where these women get the idea that there are a lot of people who believe that males and females are biologically the same. I don't know many people who believe that. Now, there are certainly parts of gender behavior that are socialized. For instance, I remember going into a Toys R Us, and on the left side, all the games were war and battles. On the right side, it was all princesses and fluffy little things. Now that is socialization. A child goes in, they learn you can be this or that. Your options are defined and limited from the start. Now I remember when my daughter was quite young, probably 3 or 4, one of her male cousins asked her why she always plays with boy toys. And I'm very surprised. I wonder where he got that. My guess is he overheard an adult say that. But my experience with the kids is that they really, especially at that young age, they aren't thinking in terms of boy toys and girl toys. They play, and they play with what they want, unless, boys are told boys can't play with dolls, that's not manly or something. Now, clothing is another interesting area for gender definition. Some people think only women should wear dresses or skirts, but dresses are something that, pants are something that were pretty recently invented in human history. I believe they came to Europe through the Mongol hordes. They were something that were invented for horseback riding. So does that mean that before that, the men of Europe were not masculine? These ideas about gender-based clothing are very much based on time and space, the location where you are geographically, and the time you live in history. And some people, gender clothing is a kind of costume and a kind of theater. And some people dress to the extremes of that theater in varying degrees. Some women will wear the most traditionally feminist clothes in order to announce their femininity. And the same for men. As I said, a lot of men who are insecure about their masculinity wear the biggest tough guy costumes they can come up with, to the point where it becomes silly. And some take it to so extreme. I read a book by a female psychologist who referred to Marilyn Monroe as a female drag impersonator, meaning that she was putting on this extreme femininity as a type of acting and a type of theater. And, I've heard stories of her female friends who said, "You want to see her?" And then she would put on the Marilyn Monroe persona to the public. Now, as to the fundamental question of whether male and female behavior are biological or social constructs, it seems to me that anytime nature versus nurture question comes up, the answer is usually both. It's good to keep in mind that actions become behaviors, and behaviors become instincts, and instincts become biology, and the two can morph into each other throughout time, and there's not really a clear line between those things. Her concerns about agreeableness are quite strange to me. And why does she equate agreeableness with wokeness? It seems to me that the people who speak out about wokeness are perfectly willing to be disagreeable, perfectly willing to stir up trouble. Now, I do meet a lot of people who are afraid of stirring up trouble, being controversial, offending anybody in every way. And usually they're well-meaning people, but probably timid by nature. And I see this both in conservatives and liberals, and I see it both in males and females. As far as I can see, this timidness is not gender-based in any way. I recently had a situation during a music video shoot where dancers were asked to wear, they were the cone hats that Vietnamese peasants often wear, but they were painted in these neon pink and orange colors. And one of the dancers, a male dancer, got concerned that people would be offended by this, by, stealing from other cultures or whatever. And so I took him out to a table with the other dancers and actors. And two of the dancers were Asian. One was from Japan, one was from, I think, Cambodia. And we talked it out. Neither of the Asian people had any problem with it at all. But they also said that, if you believe in what you're doing artistically, you should just go ahead and do it. And if people get offended, you stand behind what you're doing. And I told him, people get offended by me all the time. If anybody says anything, blame it on me.
This is a debate where I acknowledge there are good arguments on both sides. And I respect people who believe that the great feminization is a naturally occurring phenomenon, that it's just that we let women compete, and it turns out that they're quite good at competing in white-collar work or whatever it is. But my assessment of the facts and the evidence is that that is not true. My assessment is that the great feminization is artificial. It exists because, first of all, anti-discrimination law makes it essentially illegal to have women underrepresented in your company. The reason why so many businesses, especially large firms that are more vulnerable to these kinds of lawsuits, have so many hiring programs, the reason why managers are assessed at the end of the year for bonuses and promotion and other kinds of assessment on how many women they have hired and promoted, right? Like whether you're meeting your diversity targets in gender diversity, right? Managers, their careers rise and fall on these things. So the reason why these diversity hiring programs for gender exist is because if your company employs too few women, then all it takes is one woman coming along saying, I wasn't promoted as fast as I wanted. I think it's because my bosses are sexist. Oh, look, I did a statistical analysis of this firm. It turns out women are underrepresented. There we go. I got a lawsuit. Bring me a lawyer. So yes, this may come as a surprise to people who do not work in corporate America. But yeah, corporate America aggressively targets women for hiring and promotion because they are trying to fend off the threat of any lawsuit. Because I think Goldman Sachs holds the record for largest settlement in a gender discrimination lawsuit, that is for not hiring and promoting women fast enough. And the size of that settlement, I think, was over $200 million.
Now, we have to keep in mind that this is in context of a long history of discrimination against women in the workplace, was accepted as a normal thing and as it should be. So the fact that people are still grumbling about women being allowed equal rights in the workplace it's not surprising that they're still grumbling. Now, a lot of conservatives talk about DEI hires. Conservative pundit Charlie Kirk said that if he gets on a plane and he sees a black pilot, then he's concerned for his safety because he thinks they may be a DEI hire. Now, in order for this to be a concern, you have to believe that out of all the millions of black people in the country, you can't find one that has the skills to be a pilot. There's always an assumption that whoever it is, men or women, that there aren't enough skilled people to fill the slots. Therefore, if a black man is hired, if a woman is hired, she doesn't have the skills for the job. And that's what this woman implies here, that when you have these offices filled with women, that many of them are unqualified for the job, or as she calls it, they're not able to swing with the big boys. Now, she refers to Goldman Sachs. By chance, my work life has caused me to spend a lot of hours with various Goldman Sachs executives. And they do complain about having to hire women and minorities. But am I surprised that old white male millionaires, and in some cases billionaires, think this way? Not at all.
Number two, I'll just do very quickly, is HR departments did not exist 100 years ago. At the end of World War II, almost no firms had HR departments. Today, the HR lady at your company plays a really big role in what the day-to-day experience of your office life is like. That is the clear demonstration I can think of that today's office is so much more feminized than it was even 40 years ago. So yeah, women are flourishing in that context because men tend to have more rough edges at work and tend to get in trouble with the HR lady more just for being more eccentric or odd or aggressive or prickly or whatever. Women tend to keep their head down and be quiet and not get in trouble with the HR lady.
Now, this is a strange claim. Where did she come up with the idea that men are more odd and prickly and get into trouble with the HR lady, as she says? And why she says HR lady? When I was working corporate jobs, we had an HR man. But this idea that men are more oddball than women is very strange.
Unfortunately, the very personality types that tend to get in trouble with the HR lady most often are also the ones who tend to push innovation, be your biggest sellers, be the most dynamic, creative thinkers. So businesses that discourage those people or even eliminate those people. If you get rid of everybody who annoys the HR lady and who doesn't fit into her clear idea of what an employee should be, you might exclude some scumbags, but you're also going to exclude a bunch of geniuses. So yeah, the great feminization is one from aggressive, explicit targeting, businesses trying to feminize their office in order to be in compliance with the law, and two, the HRification of every workplace in America, which is, in my opinion, a total disaster.
Now, there may be some truth that the people who don't fit into corporate culture are more likely to innovate, but that has nothing to do with gender. I mean, what I saw corporate culture is a place of fear. People want their underlings to be mediocre and not a threat because they fear them. I one time worked in an office and somebody complained that I walked around with my back up straight, with good posture. And I did notice that a lot of people in this office walked around hunched over and depressed looking. But the fact that I get a complaint for walking upright was very strange. But the idea that women are less aggressive in the workplace seems like nonsense to me. Of course, women who are aggressive in the workplace get labeled as bitches and so forth. But what I've seen again is that there are just as many aggressive women in the workplace as there are men. And she ends with saying that women in the workplace is a complete disaster.
A landmark case that I refer to in the article involved a shipyard in Florida that was obviously 98% male in its workforce. And these are blue-collar guys. So some of them had pinups up on their office workspaces, you know, scantily clad women. Because it's a blue collar, it's a shipyard. What do you want? And there was a lady who worked there who said that she was offended by those kinds of things on the wall, and also sexual jokes and banter, which were not targeted at her. They were just kind of in general. This is how the guys at the shipyard were talking. And she said, this made me feel very unwelcome. And I thought this workplace was hostile to women. And the judge agreed. It said that an atmosphere that deters women from continuing in a job is exactly the same as a sign on the wall saying men only. So it's workplace anti-discrimination law and hostile environment law is very fuzzy. And a lot of times it's hard to say what is or is not legal or illegal under the law. There are a lot of behaviors that are not in themselves illegal, but could be cited in a lawsuit by somebody who was suing your company as evidence of a workplace that was hostile to women. And so this is why employers are on edge, because they never know if they're in compliance with the law or not.
Now, she seems surprised that nude pictures of females and sexual jokes in the workplace would be a problem. She says that employers are nervous because they don't know what is and what will and what won't be a problem. But I mean, come on, if you don't realize that putting pictures of nude women in the workplace are going to be a problem, you must really be dim-witted. And then she also says, they're blue-collar guys, come on, as if it's understood and accepted that blue-collar workers are not very smart, and they're crude, and I don't see that as a stereotype that we should accept as true. There are all kinds of people who are blue-collar workers that aren't like that.
Yeah, and I think if I were a boss running a shipyard, I would probably say, guys, let's cut it out with the nudie pictures. On the other hand, I have come to understand through my decades in this role that there are things about male behavior, especially male group behavior, that are baffling to me, that I just got to shrug and say that's a guy thing, and I don't get it. Like hazing, for example, is something that every frat in the world does. I don't get it. Why is being mean to your frat or pranking? This frat behavior seems really immature to me, and yet it seems to be an integral part of building bonds of brotherhood. And I just at some point got to throw up my hands and say, well, I think the fraternity guys know more about it than I do. So I just got to understand that boys are that way.
Frat boy behavior is not a guy thing. I would say most men think that frat boy behavior is moronic at best. And letting them off by saying it's just a guy thing, or the blue collar workers, come on, is the same as saying that grab them by the pussy is okay because it's just locker room talk. It's it's not just locker room talk. It's a mental issue with certain men. It doesn't represent all men in any way.
The president of the university, a quite famous guy named John Silber, had given a speech at a conservative think tank in Washington where he said, I think the fact that so many women are in the workplace now has had a deleterious effect on child rearing and has led to an increase in juvenile delinquency. Just kind of a basic observation that working mothers have to make sacrifices and it doesn't always work out the best for their kids. She said the fact that he has that opinion and gave that speech shows that he wants women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. And that's why he didn't give me tenure, because he doesn't think I belong in the workplace.
What department was she in?
English.
Okay.
English.
She said barefoot and pregnant. She really reduced it.
I don't think she actually said barefoot.
I agree that this university president's statements make his hiring choices suspect. I mean, why did he say women in the workplace? Why not two parents in the workplace? Men are capable of taking care of children, but obviously his belief is that taking care of children is fundamentally women's work and that they are the only ones who can do it. What surprises me is that this guy was stupid enough to say that out loud. I guess he probably thought he was in a safe place at his conservative think tank.
So part of the pushback that you've gotten on this piece is that there's no data. How do you quantify this? I mean, I know you have a lot of statistics and you do have data in the piece. I think it's unfair to say that you don't. But part of the problem with this whole framing is that it's really hard to prove. Like it's a feeling, and something like productivity in a more balanced workplace. If there was a manager who was able to kind of control the hyper emotionality of certain people and yet also control like the hyper masculinity, rambunctiousness of the men and really have a productive workplace, is there any way of measuring that? Like, is there any way of measuring how unproductive or dysfunctional like an all-female workplace is?
It's bizarre that she's willing to bring up the old trope that women are hyper emotional. These two, they just can't hide their prejudice against women.
He puts forward the theory that feminization is specifically linked to a slowdown in innovation. And that's one where actually we do have quite a lot of data on male versus female attitudes to science and innovation. Two of the most sort of surprising to me poll findings. They're kind of on unrelated topics. One is if you ask people, would you go to the moon? Like, would you take a trip in a rocket ship? Assume we could pay for it and you could get the training. Like, is that something you would want to do? Mm-hmm. Is that something you'd be interested in? Huge sex differences in that. Basically all men say, yeah, I would love to go and be an astronaut. Yes, please. Whereas women have to be honest, this is a place where I am definitely in line with the women, which is like, why would I do that? You're in a tin can. What do you think you're going to see up there? I have a rough idea of what that adventure would entail, and I do not see the attraction. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge difference. Just like, should you be an explorer or not? Is there? But
that's an evolutionary trait, right? I mean, that's risk taking. Yeah. I would think it would not benefit women in the aggregate, especially if they're mothers, to be interested in that kind of thing.
Now the question is, many men might say they want to go to the moon, but if they're really given an opportunity and had to do the work and had to face the fear, I think very few of them would actually do it. It's just male bluster. And to use that as evidence that women are less innovative in the workplace is laughable, completely ridiculous.
Exactly. And the other one, quite similar, is nuclear power. For whatever reason, women are very anti-nuclear, even though all the science says it's great. And And even if you show them the evidence that it's safer than other forms of power, that you are not going to have mutant children, women are just like, nope, don't trust it. Nuclear seems like bad news to me. And it's so strange that there would be such a huge sex difference in an energy issue that has nothing to do with gender. And yet it's one of the biggest, most consistent findings that men are pro-nuclear and women are anti-nuclear. But if we put those together, that women don't like nuclear power and don't want to go to space, and men are the opposite, that seems to correlate with just generally different attitudes to, as you say, risk, and also science and innovation and technology. Well, if women have this kind of, why would you bother? That just seems like bad news to me, attitude to technology, then more women in the workplace might naturally lead to a slowdown in technological development. So if that's something that we have seen and observed about the world and the pace of scientific development, and we are looking for an explanation for why that slowdown occurred, I think feminization should be a candidate explanation, even though it's, might not be the kind of thing that lends itself to a clear data demonstration in the sense of, I'm pointing to this simple graph, here it is.
And now she claims that men are pro-nuclear and women are anti-nuclear. A quick bit of research on this shows how questionable that claim is. Actually, a lot of women are neither pro or anti. They're skeptical, but they have not made a decision one way or another. Now, her other claim that nuclear is the safest form of energy, what other energy source has caused regions to be uninhabitable for decades to come? None that I can think of. But either way, to claim that going to the moon and support of nuclear energy are evidence that women are anti-science and are less innovative in the workplace. It's such faulty logic that it's ridiculous.
Where men have done the same thing, you get fields like, public health, for instance, where apparently there's men in those fields that are just as, sort of feminine, quote unquote, in their approach as women. Is that because these fields have become female dominated enough that sort of everybody's acting like a woman?
I think to start off right off the bat, I don't think there's any gender difference in ambition or careerism.
Right.
I think men are just as likely to, approach their career in their office and saying, all right, that guy is a threat to me, therefore he's the one I need to take down, right? Like that, oh man, that happens in male workforces all the time. The question is how they go about it. One incident that I mentioned in the article is Barry Weiss at the New York Times. That poor girl not a girl. That poor lady was hounded out of that job mercilessly. It was egregious behavior, absolutely horrible. But, they went about it in a very feminine way. If you're a man and you're a reporter at the New York Times and there's another reporter across the newsroom who's a threat to you and you need to take him down, you need to outshine him. Or you might need to humiliate him by out-arguing him, or
getting the scoop. But this was Slack chip. Slack is a feminine phenomenon. I mean, it was. I'm sure there were men at the New York Times who were going after Barry as well, but it was happening it was back channels.
And she said they were targeting people in the newsroom who were friendly with her. Like they would go up and say, I don't know why you're friends with her. Like, oh my gosh, that's so mean, girls. Or one thing that Barry Weiss did, which was so mature. There was another lady reporter who was being kind of one of the ringleaders of this anti-Barry Weiss movement. And she said, you know what? Let's just sit down. You and me, let's go get coffee. Let's talk about this like adults. And the woman said, no, I refuse to meet with you. Yeah. I'm not even going to do it. And so if it was two men, they would have been able to sit down and have a conversation.
All the men are acting like women. This writer has such idealistic ideas of how men behave that it defies logic, and she uses those pro-masculine prejudices as a basis to disparage women. But the more I listen to this, the more I wonder how these women are taken seriously. Their bias is shown every time they open their mouth. The use of logic is faulty. The assumptions they postulate are ridiculous. It's really strange that these types of views have been given any kind of credence. Now, I think basically this goes back to what I referred to earlier, is they have this outdated cartoon-like vision of what men and women are. That men are these honorable, strong, beings, and women are like these weak, catty, dishonorable, emotional creatures. And they're so locked into these outdated caricatures that they can't see reality. Anyways, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you soon.